When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouthwatering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to Tea Break Time Travel, where every month we look at a different archaeological object and take you on a journey into their past. Hello and welcome to episode 31 of Tea Break Time Travel. I am your host, Dr. Matilda Ziebrecht, and today I am savouring a peach and vanilla tea, which is just delicious. And interestingly enough, you're only supposed to stew it for like 30 seconds, but it's so potent and it's really nice and it's just sweet and refreshing and soothing and everything that one needs in a tea. Anyway, and there's no guest with me today because it's only the second Tuesday of the month. So that means it's time for our next installment of Tea Break Time Travel Training, where we look at all of those theoretical and methodological backgrounds that every seasoned time traveler, and of course archaeologist, needs to know before they set off on their journey. So today we're continuing with our theme of dating, as in checking how old something is, not dating. And we're going to be talking about thermoluminescence dating, which, my goodness, when I was writing out the script for this, trying to write out thermoluminescence as many times as I needed to, it's a horrible word to write out. Anyway, so thermoluminescence, what is it? So basically, it's a dating method used to determine the time at which materials, including some kind of crystalline mineral, were last heated. So let's go right back to basics. So a few months ago, we looked at radiocarbon dating, and we talked about how you could date the point at which an organism died by identifying the point at which radioactive carbon-14 isotopes start to decay. So radioactivity is also a very important part of thermoluminescence dating, but instead of looking at the release of radioactivity, so the decay of an isotope, we're instead looking at the accumulation of radioactivity over time. So first, let's give a little bit of a background to the relevant information, those little pieces of physics that you need to know in order to understand thermoluminescence dating. So, right back to basics. An atom. What is an atom? So an atom is basically the thing that we are all made up of, although, funny story, I was recently watching one of my favorite TV series called Outnumbered, and the little girl in it, Karen, is talking to her dad, and she says, "What's an atom?" And he says, "Oh, well, everything's made up of atoms. You know, atoms are inside all of us." "What, even ducks?" "Yes, even ducks." "Even the spoon?" "Yeah, even the spoon." "Even dreams?" And he goes, "Well, that's a good point. What about shadows?" And he's going, well, it just made me think. But anyway, an atom basically is what we're all made from. And it consists of a core nucleus, which has protons and neutrons. And we learned about this last time for radiocarbon dating, because remember, it's called carbon-14 isotope, and an isotope of an atom is basically different versions of the same atom with different numbers of neutrons. So anyway, so you have protons and neutrons in the middle, and then you have a little cloud of electrons, which you might remember from high school is generally depicted as lying in neat little rings, kind of orbiting, almost like lots of little moons orbiting the central nucleus. So that's important to remember. That is the general structure of an atom. So another thing that is important to note is that all kind of minerals specifically absorb radiation from the environment over time. So you're constantly getting radiation coming in kind of on a steady stream. This ionizes the kind of lattice matrix of the mineral, the actual structure of it itself. So what do I mean by the lattice matrix? I'm saying lattice matrix, by the way, because I read both words in different papers. I call it the matrix, but then that also makes me think of the Matrix film. So anyway, so you have the matrix, which is not a load of lists of lots of green numbers, but is actually formed from lots of atoms linked together in different structures depending on the kind of lattice or the crystal type. So you might, again, remember in high school chemistry, learning about, for example, graphite and diamond are both made up of linked carbon atoms, but they have very different properties because the structure of their internal matrix is completely different. So while carbon is basically two sort of solid layers linked together by slightly more squishy links, that means that they move around a lot more. That means that graphite is a lot more malleable, whereas diamond is a very, very hard, very solid structure. So that means that the pattern of the matrix is more solid and secure. And that means that diamond itself has a very different properties to graphite. So we've learned about structure of an atom, structure of a mineral in terms of its matrix. So we just talked about all minerals absorb this radiation, and this ionizes the mineral matrix. So what is ionization? Ionization is basically creating something into an ion. What is an ion? Well, an ion is an atom or a molecule with a net electrical charge. So what does this actually mean? Well, in extremely simplified terms, a non-ionized atom has basically the same number of negatively charged electrons, so the little moons orbiting the nucleus, and positively charged protons, which are in the nucleus. So they sort of basically cancel each other out. So there's no negative or positive charge. They just kind of have a nice little equality, a nice little equilibrium going on. However, if you have more or less electrons than protons, then this makes it a form of ion of that atom. So if there's more electrons, then it will have a negative charge. If there's more protons, it will have a positive charge. Everyone's still with me? Okay, good. So what does all of this have to do with thermoluminescence dating? Well, if you break it down very specifically, thermo is heat, luminescence is light, or specifically the emission of light. So kind of light coming out of something, that's luminescence. So when your radiation, which is constantly kind of, remember, accumulating over time, radiation is constantly being absorbed, it enters the crystal matrix. This leads to the ionization. So the actual way in which that happens is that the kind of little bit of energy that it gives kicks off a couple of the electrons from their lovely little orbiting rings. So these electrons detach themselves from their parent atoms and they become sort of lodged in what's referred to as electron traps, which are basically kind of gaps or impurities or in the lattice matrix. And over time, this kind of continuous, naturally occurring radiation from the environment continues to enter the matrix, continues to ionize, so more and more electrons will be kind of pushed out and fall into these electron traps. So that's building up over time. This is what's known as a kind of radiation dose. So these electron traps get emptied in what is known as a clock reset when a very intense application of heat occurs. Because again, those of you who remember physics will remember heat equals energy. So you're pumping all of this extra energy into the matrix, and all of these electrons, which have just been kind of chilling in the electron traps, will then get enough energy to push themselves out of the traps again and escape and go back to where they came from. So all of these electrons are escaping back to their spots. And as they do this, they kind of lose, because it takes up a lot of energy, so they emit energy in the form of photons, which is a kind of light, which in turn creates this luminescence because it's emitting light. So in very simple terms, that means that the object is heated, and through this, all of the electrons going back to their places, a little bit of light is emitted. And that light is directly proportional to this level of accumulated radiation that's been going on over time, right? Because the more electrons you'll have being accumulated, the more light they will emit, so the more luminescence you'll have as they all return to their spots. So that means that by measuring this luminescence, you can work out how many electrons have been freed, so how much accumulated radiation there has been, how much time has passed, therefore, since the last time the clock reset happened, so the last time all of these electrons were emptied. And by looking at that, you can then basically see how long it's been since the last strong application of heat to an object. So that's sort of how it works in principle. What you're basically doing is seeing the last time that something was heated. And this is, by the way, with thermoluminescence dating. You also have what's called optically stimulated luminescence, which looks not at when the last application of heat, but looks at the last application of light. Maybe we'll do another episode on that, or maybe, we'll see how that goes. I might not be able to stretch it out to a whole episode again. Well, we'll see. So what does this have to do with archaeology and how it applies? Well, so thermoluminescence itself was already pretty well known before it was applied to archaeology. So it was quite commonly used to investigate kind of defects in solids and materials, because remember, these electron traps are caused by defects in the lattice matrix. So you'd think the more luminescence you have, the more defects you might have as well. It was also widely used to measure the radiation dose given to cancer patients. So a very different form of application, but also extremely useful. And then Farrington Daniels and a bunch of his fellow researchers, back in 1953, they wrote a paper where they first noted the potential of using thermoluminescence dating to date things, to date these big events. And they specifically looked at it in terms of kind of geological, but also archaeological research. So they looked at dating and correlating geological events that happen in quaternity stratigraphy, so specifically lava and eruptions and volcanoes and things, because that's looking at this intense heat, right? And then from there, in the early 60s, it was developed even further as a means of dating fired pottery, most notably by Martin Aitken and his team in 1964. And Martin Aitken has then written loads of really great papers and books on the topic as well. So he's kind of the father of thermoluminescence dating in archaeology. And so that was kind of the real start of it being used in archaeology. It was used to date pottery because you're looking at an object that at some point in its past, when it was first created, as you know, hopefully, in order to fire pottery, you have your kind of clay that you mold into something and it will dry and it will be solid. But the only way that you can really strengthen that material further is by firing it. So putting it in usually a kiln. It used to be also in just a fire pit. And the point is you want to have a very, very high heat, which then kind of merges all of the lovely molecules and matrices and everything together and makes it a really nice solid material. So this heating event would have been the last kind of big firing event in this object's life. Because of course you might have pots and things that are then heated on the fire and, you know, to cook and all of that kind of stuff, but they will never be heated up to the same temperature as when they were originally fired. So that's the sort of emptying, the clock reset event, which then empties all of these electron traps, would have been the firing of this material. So you think you have a bunch of clay, you gather that clay up. Over time, you know, it's gradually getting more and more radiation accumulation. Lots and lots of electrons are falling out into these electron traps. You have this clay, you're doing stuff with it, you're putting it up, more and more electrons falling into the electron traps. You make it into a little cup and more radiation, more and more radiation. And then you've created this lovely cup, it's dried, maybe you've glazed it, I don't know, and you put it in the kiln or the fire pit or something like that, and it fires. And that fire, that application of heat is what creates the clock reset. So all of the electrons go whoopoo, and they go back to their original spots in the lattice matrix. And then it's taken out of the fire, it cools down, whatever. And throughout its use then as a pot and throughout its burial, throughout its, just life in a museum, whatever, it's again constantly accumulating more and more radiation, more and more electrons and more things. So then at some point, scientists, archaeological scientists will come along, will take a little sample of the pottery, will put it on a really high level of heat, again, equivalent to the firing heat, and that will then empty it again. And by measuring the luminescence then that comes out during that kind of heating event and during that clock reset event, they can see, this is the amount of time that's passed since the last time it was heated to this higher temperature. So this is how long it's been since this pot was fired. So you can see when the pot was made, which is pretty exciting. So and since that sort of initial use being referred to, so pottery dating, it also is used to look at, for example, heated flint tools. So quite often flint tools in the past would have been heated to make them easier to work. This is kind of one of the theories. So that's a sort of research sort of avenue that's happening at this point. You can also look at, for example, slag, which is the leftover material that you get when you do iron smelting. So it's all the kind of impurities and all of the stuff that comes out of the iron when you're trying to get the pure iron smelted out of your sort of ore, your iron ore. You get the iron and then you get the slag, which is sort of the leftover stuff, put very, very simply. And so inside that slag, you'll have things like quartz crystals and that kind of stuff. You can also then look at, when was it last heated in this furnace to create this smelting event kind of thing. That's what you can also look at in terms of that. You can also look at, for example, volcanic rock from glass production. So there's all kinds of things. Basically, any time an object, a mineral object in the past was heated, so an inorganic object was heated at a particularly high temperature for a particular event, you should be able to date that using thermoluminescence dating. So hopefully that's sort of clear. We're going to have a quick pause while you can take it all in, and I'll be back in a moment.
The Humana Gold Plus Give Back Medicare Advantage Plan gives you $1,368 back each year in your Social Security check. Choose coverage that helps you keep more money in your pocket. Learn more at GetHumana.com. Humana, a more human way to healthcare. The Part B Give Back benefit pays part or all of your Part B premium, and the amount may change based on the amount you pay for Part B. Limitations and restrictions may apply. Humana is a Medicare Advantage HMO and PPO organization with a Medicare contract. Enrollment in any Humana plan depends on contract renewal.
It's football time, which turns Thursday and Sunday into the best days of the week. Well, they just got better, because now through October 27th, Keno has 30% higher payouts during bonus hours. Win $500, it becomes $650. That's like getting extra field goal points for scoring a touchdown. So play Keno online and anywhere Keno is sold and get 30% higher payouts during bonus hours. Thursdays 6 to 8 p.m. and Sundays 1 to 3 p.m. Only from the Georgia Lottery. Play responsibly.
The Humana Gold Plus Give Back Medicare Advantage Plan gives you $1,368 back each year in your Social Security check. Choose coverage that helps you keep more money in your pocket. Learn more at gethumana.com. Humana, a more human way to healthcare. The Part B Give Back benefit pays part or all of your Part B premium, and the amount may change based on the amount you pay for Part B. Limitations and restrictions may apply. Humana is a Medicare Advantage HMO and PPO organization with a Medicare contract. Enrollment in any Humana plan depends on contract renewal.
Welcome back, everyone. So, hopefully you kind of understand the concept of thermoluminescence dating at this point. But so how it actually works in practice, we sort of talked about. It's a bit harder to explain than the previous dating methods because it basically involves a lot of calculations, which we're going to get into again in a little bit. But let's look at sort of the pros of it first. So actually, in comparison to a lot of other scientific dating methods, especially those that we've already looked at on this podcast, it's not as limited when it comes to time period, for example. So, I mean, dendrochronology, actually, you could argue you could go all the way back to the dawn of time because you just have to create that sort of never-ending little reference kind of visual. Radiocarbon dating, as you know, can only go back to sort of 40 to 60,000 years ago. But actually, thermoluminescence dating, you can go back as far as you want, really. And you can basically go all the way back to the start of human history, for sure. And as I say, they were using it to measure these geological events. So you can even go back even further. So also, what's really great about thermoluminescence dating and the dating of kind of inorganic materials in this way is because, remember, what's really important to look at when you look at dating techniques and dating technologies is to consider, okay, but what actually is this date that I have? Like, what actually am I looking at when I look at this date? So remember, with things like dendrochronology and radiocarbon dating, because you're looking at these organic materials, what you're essentially looking at is the point at which that organism died. So you're looking at when the tree died. You're looking at when the animal that was used to make the leather died. You're looking at, the bone. You're looking at when the animal died, all of that kind of thing. And so sometimes you have, especially when it comes to dendrochronology, you have these issues where you have wood that is reused. You have things that may have died but then were used later. It's harder to get a kind of specific idea of exactly what it is you're dating and exactly what that date means. But thermoluminescence dating is of an actual event, like an activity, because it's a heating event. So what you're dating is the point at when that ceramic was heated, or when that piece of pottery was fired into a ceramic. You're looking at that point at which someone heated up that flint tool in order to work it. You're looking at the point that someone fired up that furnace to smelt their iron ore to create iron. So it's, a bit more accurate in that respect. And it's actually, in general, considered one of the most accurate methods of scientific dating because there's a lot of different ways that you can allow and sort of calibrate for errors. And it's sort of known what the errors are a little bit more as well, which we'll get into now too. So in terms of the issues of kind of thermoluminescence dating. So one of the main problems, well, there's a couple of main problems, but one of the main problems is that different minerals, so different kind of rock types or whatever you want to call it, have different levels of sensitivity to the application of heat. So we already talked about, right, differences in the sort of lattice and matrices of different mineral types, so graphite versus diamond, etc. So of course, sometimes that also means that the sensitivity will be different depending on which sort of internal structure they have. So for this reason, generally, when you're looking at things like thermoluminescence dating, you want to always focus on one mineral type, which is generally what people do. They might focus on a couple of different mineral types, but the problem is that the point is that you want to have each kind of dating process focus on one mineral type. And then you can have multiple dating processes of multiple mineral types from one site. But yeah, you don't want to have like, oh, let's just add in like the quartz and the feldspar and the thing, and, you know, from this and compare them all together, because they might have very different levels of sensitivity. And in relation to that, you also need to always calculate what's called the radiation dose rate. And again, I don't want to get too much into all this because it gets a bit complicated, especially if you can't see the measurements and the calculations written down. I've included, by the way, a bunch of case studies in the show notes. So if this is something that's of interest to you, or if this is something that you need to know more about, do go and have a look at them. They give sort of some nice examples of the different graphs that you get, because basically what happens is the thermoluminescence comes out and you measure it in what's known as a glow curve, which is basically kind of seeing how much is coming out related to the time. And the actual kind of measurements that you're doing are also very much related to the amount of thermoluminescence versus the radiation dose. I think it was thermoluminescence measurement divided by radiation dose. I think that was what it was. Again, this is all in the case study, so do go and have a look. But so the radiation dose rate is the amount of radiation accumulated per year. And this is actually, a surprisingly simple process, but you need to measure the radioactivity of the sample material. You need to measure the cosmic ray dose of the environment it was found in. And then through combining kind of those calculations with a couple of other calculations, you reach something known as the radiation field. And then that's your base that you have to divide the thermoluminescence measurements by the radiation dose to then find the years or the amount of time. So you see in the glow curve, you see kind of the older the sample, the higher the thermoluminescence, which then makes sense. But then the curve itself is also shown in the kind of a graph that includes all kinds of other calibrations to make sure that you know exactly what it is you're measuring and to kind of compare those against almost control measurements. So it looks more complicated than it is, basically, but it's sort of, you're almost testing yourself as you do it. So you're making sure that it's all sorted as you're doing it, which is quite nice. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that the intensity of the heat actually has a direct influence on the amount of radiation, or the amount of kind of extra energy, that enters the matrix. So you'll have a difference in kind of thermoluminescence or radiation sensitivity in minerals heated to different temperatures as well. So the same mineral heated to different temperatures will show different things. And this is particularly important to be aware of if, for example, you're trying to date something like, say, the segment of a kiln or a furnace wall. The mineral samples that are taken from different layers of that wall will have different thermoluminescence measurements because they'll have been heated to different temperatures. Obviously, the inside of the wall will be super hot, right, compared to the outside of the wall. It might only be like an infinitesimal difference, but it's still going to be different, and it's still going to then technically show different ages, even though they were all involved in the same heating event. And again, there's a way to counteract this. It's known as the foil technique, where basically you account for those different measurements in the different layers and create almost like an average measurement to allow for kind of the range of sensitivity. But this is something that's still being kind of researched and still being kind of classified and coordinated. And like I say, actually thermoluminescence is one of the most accurate ones in that respect, because although you do still have some influence from external kind of contexts like environmental conflicts, actually this is significantly less, there's significantly less influence in thermoluminescence dating than in other methods like radiocarbon dating. So things like the Industrial Revolution, all of that kind of stuff, things like environmental differences don't actually have as many detrimental effects on the efficiency as a dating method, as we discussed in previous episodes, because as long as you take the correct calculations and the correct measurements, you'll be able to calibrate it fairly easily. So that's quite nice about this method as well. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that, of course, if there have been other heating events, so I mentioned already that usually if you're cooking a pot on the fire, that won't be enough to empty the electron trap, so that won't be enough to kind of reset the clock. But maybe it was refired. Maybe it was caught in a fire. Maybe it was thrown in a lava pit. I don't know. But the point is maybe it had other heating events, or maybe it wasn't actually fired enough the first time to completely empty the electron trap. So there was still some there. So it wasn't really a full clock reset. Again, there's sort of a test to check for this. It's known as the plateau test, and it's always incorporated into thermoluminescence dating measurements. So you'll have that glow curve showing the luminescence, so showing the light that it's emitting out, but you'll also have the plateau test, which uses very similar calculations, but is much less prone to error because it uses sort of controllable data. And again, quite complicated calculations that I can't really explain or describe properly, but I'll leave those case studies in the show notes and you'll be able to see it there. It's basically kind of creating a little plateau that shows the point at which the glow curve would show the thermoluminescence. So it's kind of a nice second check almost, or sort of a part 2 check. So that is thermoluminescence dating. I think I covered all of the main points that I needed. Funny story, I actually wrote an essay on thermoluminescence dating back in my master's. So I had a look at that, I admit, when I was writing the script for this episode. But there were still quite a few things that I didn't really get, so I had to look up more stuff. But I'm really enjoying doing these Tea Break Time Travel training episodes. They're really good fun for me personally, because I really enjoy being able to look up all of this stuff. And I know kind of the basics of each one, but it's fun because this time I really get to be like, wait, but why is it like that? And then I follow that rabbit hole and I look it up and I'm like, oh, that makes way more sense. So I'm learning lots. I really hope that you're learning lots. I hope that you enjoy these ones. Please do let me know. It's really nice to get feedback from listeners, even if it's just, I don't know, a comment on an Instagram post, or, you know, I share this stuff on Instagram. You can follow me at the Archaeologist Teacup on all social media platforms. I also have a website. Do get in touch and let me know what you think about the podcast, because I mean, I really enjoy doing it, like I say, but I don't want to just be kind of speaking into the void. It takes quite a lot of time to research this stuff and then record. And then, you know, my lovely editor, Rachel at the APN, has to go through and edit it, and it has to be published and it has to be publicized and all of this kind of thing. So it is a lot of work for one episode, and, you know, it's free for you guys to listen to. So it would be nice to hear that there are people actually listening to it. Do let us know. Do let me know if you're enjoying these and if you think that it's worth me keeping doing them. Because if you don't, then I don't have to. That's fine. That'll save me an hour or two a week of work. And that would be, so yeah, do get in touch via social media. You can find me at the Archaeologist Teacup on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm not as active on Twitter and Facebook, I admit, mainly Instagram. You can also find my website, thearchaeologistteacup.com. You can also comment on the APN, which is, Archaeology Podcast Network, on pretty much all social media platforms. And my contact details are in the show notes. So yeah, do get in touch. Keep an eye out for this month's guest episode as well. I chat to Dr. Sascha van der Vaart-Verschrauf all about the Sword of Os, which is very exciting. So yes, keep an eye out for that on the 4th Tuesday of the month, so in 2 weeks' time. I hope that you enjoyed our training session today. Again, please do get in touch and let us know what you think of these podcasts. Also, if you want to help support the show, please do like, subscribe, follow wherever you get your podcasts. Leaving a review is also extremely useful because it helps others to find us. And if you want to support all the other amazing series that form the Archaeology Podcast Network, you can also follow all of them. You can find them all on the website or on the social media. You can also become an APM member, which will be helping us to create even more amazing content, free content. You'll also have exclusive access to ad-free episodes and bonus content like our quarterly online events. So for more information on that, do check out the homepage at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully hearing from you. Bye. I hope that you enjoyed our journey today. If you did, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll see you next month for another episode of Tea Break Time Travel.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.